डॉक्टर बाबासाहेब आंबेडकर ओपन युनिव्हर्सिटी.
Welcome my dear student and my friends to Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University Ahmedabad in Chaitanya studio of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University Ahmedabad. We discuss the sum of point of the cost accounting in a previous session. In that we define what are the aspect of cost accounting, costing, cost accountancy, the objectives of cost accounting, then the scope of cost accounting. Then we discuss that the relation between the financial accounting and cost accounting. So here my dear friends, we are discussing the next topic, that is the advantages and limitations of cost accounting. Where there is a system, at that point of time there are some importance, advantages and disadvantages and limitations also. So in that my dear friends, the first advantage of cost accounting system is the cost system reveals the unprofitable activities, losses or inefficiencies occurring in the form of such as a wastage of a manpower, idle time, or we can say the lost time, then wastage of material in form of spoilage, excessive scrap, etc., and the wastage of resources. For example, inadequate utilization of plant machinery and other facilities. Then second most important advantage is that the cost accounting locates the exact cause for the decrease or increase in the profit or loss of a particular business unit. It also identifies the unprofitable product or product lines so that this may be eliminated or alternate the measure may as be taken. Then the cost accounts furnish the suitable data and information to the management to serve as a guide in making a proper decision, then involving the financial consideration also. Then my dear friends, the cost accounting is useful for the price fixation. Then the sale price is the generally with relating to the profit aspect and the cost aspect, and which relate to what, my dear friends, more to the economic condition that prevailing in the market than the cost. So the latter, it serves as a guide to test the adequacy of selling price. So we can say that the cost accounting is useful for the price fixation also. Then with the application of different techniques, we can say the standard costing, the budgetary control methods, the optimum level of efficiency is to be set. And for that, the cost comparison helps in cost control. Comparison may be derived the period to periodical also, but of the figures in the respect of the same unit, or we can say the factory or the several unit in the industry, or we can say the business unit, by employing uniform cost system and interfirm comparison methods are also important for that, and thus the comparison may be made in respect of cost of jobs, process, or we can say the cost center. So my dear friends, these are the few advantages of cost accounting system, or we can say the cost accounting. Now move forward towards the limitations of cost accounting. Where there is an advantage, at that point of time, my dear friends, there are some limitations, there are some disadvantage also to defining or deriving the cost accounting in appropriate manner. And for that, my dear friends, like any other system of accounting, cost accountancy is not an exact, but it is treated as an art. So we can say that it is not exact science also, but it is an art which has developed through the theories and accounting practices based on reasoning and the common sense. Many of theories cannot be proved nor can they be disproved. They grown up in the course of time to become a conventional and convention and accepted principle of particular cost accounting. So earlier in my previous session, I told that in financial accounting, the accounting standards, accounting principles, accounting conventions are important. As far as in a cost accounting, my dear friends, cost standard, cost convention and principle also play an important role, and which is the important in nature while you defining the cost accounting system. And these principles are by the no means that the static, they are changing from day to day, and what is corrected today may not hold true in circumstances tomorrow. So it creates some limitations over there. With a large number of convention, estimation and flexible factor, no cost can be said to be the exact as they incorporate a large number of convention, estimation and flexible factors. And with that, we define first that the classification of cost into its elements. So the classification of cost is also an important aspect. If you classified your cost is not appropriate, at that point of time your whole cost accounting system abolished, and which is inappropriate in nature, which create big hurdles for making a decision, for price fixation also. So the classification of cost into its element, this is the biggest disadvantage or the limitation of cost accounting, which derive from these three factors. Then materials issue pricing based on an average or standard cost, which is also important in nature. Then apportionment of overhead expenses and their allocation of cost unit or centers. Then arbitrary allocation of joint costs in a byproduct also, that is joint product and byproduct. Then division of overheads into fixed and variable basis. Sometimes it may be the semi-variable, so accordingly you have to classify it. So the cost accounting lack of the uniform procedure and format in preparing the cost information of particular product or services, and keeping in the view of these limitations, all cost accounting results can be take as mere estimates, or we can say that it's ultimately the we can say that the estimation is play an important role. And before you estimate that particular cost, the classification of cost into its element is the biggest disadvantage, and you have the accuracy in that, then and then only your cost accounting system is in appropriate manner. So for that, my dear friends, moving forward to the other topic, that is classification of cost. With the very first session, we discussed that the classification of cost and ascertainment of cost, cost accounting, cost control, cost report, cost audit, etc. But now the time is that, my dear friends, with the classification of cost in that manner, that you have to learn the cost accounting in appropriate manner. And for that, you have to define, you have to classify the cost according to that nature. So first classification is by time. In this classification, the costs are derived from the historical cost and predetermined cost. The second approach, or we can say the classification of cost, is by the nature or elements. And this, the material, labor and overheads are there. Overheads are nothing but your indirect expenses. Then by the degree of traceability of the product, that is direct and indirect costs are over there. Then fourth is association with the product, that is your product and periodical, or we can say the period cost. Then by the change in the activity or volume, that is fixed, variable and semi-variable. Then by the function, that is your manufacturing, administrative, selling and distribution cost, then research and development and pre-production cost. Then relationship with accounting period, that is capital and revenue nature. Then controllability, in the two aspects are there, that is controllable cost and non-controllable cost. Then the cost for analytics and decision making purpose, there is an opportunity cost, sunk cost, differential cost, joint cost, common cost, imputed cost, out of pocket cost, marginal cost, uniform cost, replacement cost. So these are concluded in the cost of analytics and decision making purpose. Then other costs are there, that is conversion, traceable, normal, avoidable, unavoidable and total cost. So these are the classification of cost in cost accounting. So this 10 classification is important. And when you have knowledge of this classification of the cost, at that point of time, my dear friends, you are able to do the or we can say the ascertain the cost or classify the cost in easy manner. Let us move to the in-depth discussion of different classified cost. The first classification is on the basis of time. In this, the historical cost and predetermined cost. The historical cost. These costs are ascertained after they are incurred, and such costs are available only when the production of particular thing has already been done, and they are the objectives in nature and can verified with the reference to actual operations. This is called, my dear friend, historical cost. Then moving forward to the predetermined cost. These costs are calculated before they are incurred on the basis of the specification of all factors affecting that particular cost. And such cost may be classified as estimated cost and standard cost. In that estimated cost, the costs are estimated before the goods are produced, and these are naturally less accurate than the standard. The standard cost, this is the particular concept and technique, and this method involves three aspects. First is setting up predetermined standards for each product of cost, or we can say the each product. Second aspect is comparison it with the actual. So you can define the variation of them. So formula of variances, or we can say the variation, is actual minus standard. So you can get easy method. Or we can say in other manner, the difference between actual and standard, or standard and actual cost, which defined as in a variation or variance over there. Then third aspect is pinpointing the causes of such variances and taking the remedial actions over there. So these are the mainly two aspects of what, my dear friends, predetermined cost. So in a time nature, on the classification on the basis of time, there are mainly the two costs are there. There is a first is a historical cost and second is predetermined cost. In predetermined cost, there are two aspects, or we can say the two costs are there, that is estimated cost and standard cost. Now classification by the nature or elements. In that, there are mainly three broad elements of cost are there. First is material. The material is the substance from which the product is made, known as a material. And it can be the direct material as well as indirect material. If you want to produce something, at that point of time, the substance of that product is acquired, and this is what called as a material. So while defining the direct material, it refers to those material which becomes the major part of finished product and can be easily traceable to the unit. So in direct material, we includes that all materials specifically purchased for the particular job or process. Then all material required and later requisite from the store. Then the component purchased or produced. Then primary packing material. Then material passing from one process to another process. These all are included in direct material. Then moving forward to the indirect material. All material which is used for the purpose ancillary of to the production and which can be the conventionally assigned to specific physical unit is termed as indirect material. For example, my dear friends, oil, grease, consumable stores, printing, stationery material, these all are the required for the indirect way, not a direct way. If you want to produce something and the raw material is important, so this is called what, my dear friends, in a direct material. But for that, your stationer is required to record that material which is treated as an indirect material. So in the by the nature or the element aspect in the material, there are the two types. There is a direct material, second is indirect material. Let's move further to the another aspect, that is labor. The labor cost can be classified as a direct labor as well as indirect labor. As the material, that is direct material and indirect material. So here labor is also direct as well as indirect. So the direct material is to be defined as wages paid to workers who are engaged in a particular production process and whose time can be conventionally and economical traceable in the unit of production. For example, wages paid to the compository in the printing press, then to workers is a foundry in the cast of the iron works, etc. Then in the indirect labor, which is not directly affected to your production but indirectly it is affected to your production. That is what ultimately we can say that the indirect wages, or we can say that the indirect labor. So labor employed for the purpose of carrying the task incidental to the goods or services provided is indirect labor. It cannot be practically traced in specific unit of output or any production. For example, wages of stockkeeper, foreman, supervisor, inspector, stockkeeper, timekeeper, etc. These are the indirectly affect to your production. And you pay something, so it is considered as a indirect labor. Then my dear friend, expenses. Expenses also be traceable in a two ways, that is a direct expense and indirect expense. These expenses are incurred on a specific cost unit and identified with the cost unit. For example, the cost as the spatial layout, design, drawing, hiring of a particular tools, equipment for a job, which is paid as a direct expense. And for indirect expense, which cannot be directly and the conventionally the wholly allocated to the cost center or cost unit. For example, rent, rate, taxes, insurance, power, lighting, heating, depreciation, etc. Let's take an example of direct expense and indirect expense. For one job, you allocate the equipment. Say for example, for recording this lecture, what are the direct expenses? The camera, for shooting that particular lecture series or particular video, which is called the direct expense also. The lighting and heatings are over there, which is treated as an indirect expense. So these are the expenses. So my dear friends, by the nature or elements, we define that the material, labor and expenses. In that direct and indirect material, in labor that direct labor and indirect labor, in expense there is a direct expense and indirect expense. For that, this chart is available for you, that the element of cost, first is material, labor and expenses. In this, direct, indirect, direct, indirect, direct, indirect is there. And while he put it into that indirect expenses, indirect labor and indirect material, we derive what? Which type of overheads? That is production overhead, or we can say the factory overheads, admin overhead or administration overhead, then selling and distribution overheads. So my dear friends, we conclude here with that the all indirect material, indirect labor and indirect expenses are merged when the combined as then the overheads. Which types of overheads? Production and factory overheads, administration or office overhead, selling and distribution overhead, or we can say the research and development overheads also. Let's move to the further discussion. By the degree of traceability of product, in that it distinguishes with the two main features, that is direct as well as indirect. The direct cost are those which can be the easily traceable to the product or cost unit or cost center or in a specific activity which consider to directly to your production. This is what, my dear friends, the direct cost is applicable. Say for example, cost of wood for making a furniture. It is also traceable cost. Without wood, you can't make a furniture. So that particular expense of that wood directly affected your production. So it is treated as what, my dear friend? Direct cost. Then indirect cost, which is indirectly affected to your cost system. Say for example, salary of factory manager, salary of a supervisor, etc. Rent and rates and taxes are over there, which are the common known as that the indirect cost. So these are, my dear friends, traceable to the product nature. Then association with the product. In this, we define that in a product cost and period cost. The product cost are those which are traceable to the product and included in an inventory value. In a manufacturing concern, it comprises of the cost of direct material, direct labor, manufacturing overhead, etc. And thus, the product cost is a full factory cost. The product costs are used for the valuing inventory which are shown in the balance sheet of assets till they are sold. So the product cost of goods sold is transferred to the cost of goods sold account. In an accounting entry, the product cost of goods sold is transferred to what, my dear friends? To the cost of goods sold account, which is also included in your syllabus, which we'll discuss in later in detailed manner. But here you just define what is product cost. Then, my dear friends, moving to the period cost. The period costs are incurred on the basis of time, on the basis of, my dear friends, time, such as a rent, rates, tax, salary, etc., which includes in many selling and administrative costs, essentially to keep the business running. So these all are treated as what, my dear friend? Period costs over there. Moving to the next, that is by changes in activity or volume. So in this, we define it in a three ways, or we derived and classified in a three ways. The first is fixed cost, second is variable cost, and third is a semi-variable. The fixed cost, the definition given by the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, London, in short form, that is a CIMA, defined the fixed cost as the cost which is incurred for a period and which within the certain output and turnover limits tends to be the unaffected by the fluctuation in the level of activity, or we can say the output, turnover, production, which is treated as what, my dear friend? Fixed cost. Then the variable cost. The variable cost are those costs that vary directly and the proportionately with the output. Say for example, direct material and direct labors are the we can treat it as a variable cost, because as per the unit change the variable cost is also changed. It should be kept in mind that the variable cost per unit is constant, but the total cost change corresponding to the level of output at that point of time, my dear friends, the variable cost may be changed effectively. And it is always expressed in the term of the unit, not in the terms of time, my dear friends. Then the semi-variable or semi-fixed cost. Such cost contain the fixed and variable elements also. Because of the variable elements, they fluctuate with the volume in the units, we can say the units. And because of fixed element, they do not change in a direct proportion of output. So say the semi-variable cost, the change in the same direction as that of the output changes, but not in that particular same proportion. Say for example, depreciation. For the two shift working, the total depreciation may be only an 50% more than that the single shift, and that the manager with the with have the we can say that the comparability of the small changes in output, but that is a not to the same proportion. So effectively it is treated as what, my dear friend? That is a semi variable and semi fixed cost. Let's take an example. Say for example, you have the postpaid plan of particular cell phone, particular SIM card, and in that they charge fixed at a 199 rupees. So this is what, my dear friends, that derived as an fixed cost, that is a fixed charge of 199. But if you call something beyond your limit, that is 1000 calls are available, but you beyond to the 2000, at that point of time, that difference of 1000 calls, it may be chargeable to the variable and semi-variable nature. Because the units change, the proportion change, at that point of time the cost may be the change in a future. So this is also the treated as a fixed variable and semi-variable portion. So this is what, my dear friends, that deals with the change in activity and volume. After referring this, you have to evaluate yourself with these three aspects: long question, short question and MCQ. And after determination of these three aspects, if you learn more, if you read more, then you can refer some books also. So let us begin your estimation. The first aspect is long question aspect. So you have to elaborate the advantages and disadvantages of cost accounting. The second, in a short question aspect, the first you have to define direct material, and then you have to define the cost element by the traceability also. And after charging these two questions, I am giving you another questions, that classification of cost by the each element which we study in this session. You have to write it and you elaborate it in your own purpose and give me the example of that particular nature or particular classification of cost. Why this exercise we concluded it? Because it analyze your level, that is your cost system. Then multiple choice question, that is the cost shall be classified by the change in volume, direct material, labor, direct labor or fixed cost, and none of the above. So answer is fixed cost, my dear friend. Then which shall be the classified by the nature, Material, variable cost, fixed cost, or none of the above. So material shall be classified by the nature. After moving and after concluding with this three aspect, if you want to refer something, then you may use this book, that is Cost and Management Accounting, authored by the Ravi M. Kishore, published by the Taxman Book Publisher. Hope you learn well in this session. Have a great day, my dear friends and students.